All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to the special meeting of the East Central Independent School Board Trustees of East Central, being held on January 27th, 2022 at 5:30. Let the records reflect that we have Ginger Friesenhahn, Del Brazil, Monique Priestess, James Mulkey, and Victor Garza, and then we do have a quorum. So we'll move on to item 3, prayer and pledge. Mr. Scott.
Dr. Pope.
All right, I'll begin with a prayer. Dear Lord, we come to you this hour asking for your blessing and help us as we're gathered together. We pray for guidance in the matters at hand and ask that you would clearly show us how to conduct our work with a spirit of joy and enthusiasm. Give us a desire to find ways to excel in our work, help us to work together and encourage each other to excellence. We ask that we would challenge each other to reach higher and further to the best that we can be. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you.
Move on to item 4, public comments. Ms. Colas?
No public comments, sir.
No public comments?
No, sir.
All right, move on to item 5, superintendent's report.
Trustees, in your miscellaneous packet, you have several handouts. And we want to start with the exchange summary handout. I'd like to have Ms. Colas come up and provide the board an overview of some of the feedback that we received from the community recently regarding the November bond election.
Okay, so in your packet, if you go to your packet, you will find 2 pieces of paper. They're toward the back, and they look like this. You will get them out. Everybody can follow along. You can take notes. I know on that side it's super hard to see that screen, and so we have them. So Thought Exchange is a wonderful tool that we use in the district that helps us to crowdsource information and get feedback and create effective feedback loops from our community and our stakeholders. And so it's completely anonymous. We send out a link and we ask a question. All right, some of you have probably participated in Thought Exchange before, right? And people anonymously answer the question with their thoughts around what they believe the answer is. And they give a reason why, and then they are prompted to go on to the next step, which is to read other people's ideas and thoughts and then rate them. Do they agree? Do they disagree? 1 to 5, I think. And so we asked our community to do that around the following question, which is what are some important things we can learn from the outcome of our recent bond election, and what can we do differently in preparation for future elections? All right, that was our question to them. We had 237 people participate. They wrote 137 thoughts. So not everybody who participated wrote a thought. Okay, so and that's okay. You can skip leaving your own idea and you can just go straight to rating the thoughts of others. And you can rate as many thoughts as you want. And so the 237 participants that wrote 137 thoughts rated those 137 thoughts 4,533 times. So many of them, it looks like, went pretty deep into the ideas and the thoughts and rated. Okay. So, what the program does for us is it pushes all the people that rate. It pushes the thought to the top that is the most liked by the most people. Okay. So as people are rating, the highest rated thoughts climb to the top. And so what I'll go through with y'all are the top thoughts. The first page where it says key thoughts, that page were the absolute top thoughts of the entire exchange. In a minute, we'll go through like topic by topic, because they also break the top thoughts out by specific topics. They start to group it. There's an algorithm, okay, to pull all this data together and in several different ways. So the top thoughts that people had around that question about what we could do better in the next bond or what we should consider was discuss the implications in detail of what can happen if the bond doesn't pass. I feel that I was given more information as an employee rather than as a member of the school district. The community needs to know what happens. So that was the number one top thought. The next two top thoughts were we need more outreach on bond votes coming up, as well as information about where past bond money has been spent successfully. People need to see the positive influence these bond measures have on our schools, and they need to be reminded of it frequently. The next one, I believe people did not want to spend money. However, they have no clue as to the amount of kids attending these schools and the growth in our area. In the coming years, our classes will be packed, and the more kids per teacher, the more detrimental to their ability to learn. So those were the top 3 thoughts as rated by the participants. Okay. The next page, the word area. So of all the responses that we got with the word area in it, these were the top responses. And then you'll hear they talk about like our area, the simple area. I feel like it was a result of misinformation. Our area is due to expand rapidly, and the bond money was needed to prepare our schools. I voted yes. The next one, start advertising about the bond earlier. People in different areas didn't understand what was being proposed, so they just voted against it. The next one, I voted yes for this, but what I am hearing is no one wants to tax increase, although minimal. People feel ECISD has other areas of concern that were not addressed in this bond. Okay, so those were those 3 top thoughts. Next, thoughts about community meetings. And that was meetings leading up to the bond. All right, do more town hall meetings and less Facebook Live events. Several community members are elderly and not on social media. The next thought, months of community meetings across the district provided tons of information, Facebook Lives, links on ECISD website, and more. It's important because the community can only get information if they participate in all the information provided them. And the next one was lack of information. The older people in the community, who are the ones that go out and vote, did not have enough information about the bond and its purpose. The next one, kids. The theme was kids. I believe people did not want to spend the money. However, they have no clue as to the amount of kids attending these schools and the growth in our area. Sometimes if it's a top thought, it's going to hit in a couple different topic areas, okay? And that one did. Overcrowding, our kids should be able to learn in a safe and comfortable environment. The last one, new and improved facilities. When I read the proposal, I was excited that my kids would have new and improved spaces to learn. We need to support the district with this bond. And if you go to the next page, these were some other top unthemed thoughts, okay? So, and again, this was on the first page, discuss the implications in detail of what can happen if the bond doesn't pass. So that's the second time we've heard that one as a top thought, both overall and in the unthemed section. Need to emphasize the need for additional schools. Putting it off for a later date is just going to cost even more further down the road. And then students deserve to have facilities that are up to date and can support their future endeavors. The health science program serves over 700 students. Many students leave the program with certifications that will last a lifetime. Next, bond voted. We also voted for the bond, maybe more education to what our district needs so others get out and vote. People voted against the bond because they said it wasn't equitable to all areas of the district. Why wasn't there responses to this falsehood? The folks that got this bond voted down had way more of a voice than the actual people running the district. There must be a better response. Unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to vote in this. I just learned about it but want to know more, so I'm participating in this. Voting is extremely important to me and my family. So those were those 3 thoughts. Property taxes was the topic on this next one. Tax rate. Our tax rate is the lowest in San Antonio, and we need this bond to accommodate the growth in our area. The next one, I don't know how to get people to understand the difference between Bear County taxes and school taxes. My understanding was that people don't want their taxes to go any higher. From what I understood, school taxes weren't going to go up by much. And then that next one, we can learn that the county assessor collector is responsible for property valuation, not the district. The taxes in ECISD are the lowest in Bear County. The community blames the district for taxes. It's so important because the bond passing would have raised taxes at approximately $9, full amount not till 2025. I'm not sure for that. So those were all the top thoughts for our thought exchange. Those were what people wrote and rated as the highest ideas, the most supported ideas. The next thing that is super important to us, especially as we discuss, our next steps, are the differences. So what Thought Exchange does is they look at the groupings, right? So there might be a group of people that voted a certain number of thoughts as high and a certain number of thoughts as low. And they put those together. They show you what were the differences in these two groups. If one group voted some things really low and another group voted them really high, well, what were the things that they voted on that they both supported? So when we know what brings the community together, that, the ones that were common, those are the things that we know that our community as a whole, the people that took this as a whole agreed with. So that's important to us in decision making, because if we're asking for people's support, we want to ask for things that we know people are going to support, that it's a commonly supported idea. So things that were commonly supported, and that's, go ahead and go to your next one, because it cut some of them off, and that made me a little nuts. So I made a whole nother little, there's a second one. All right. These were all the common thoughts that both groups of people decided that they agreed on. This is what everybody agreed on. We need more outreach on bond votes coming up, as well as information about where past bond money has been spent successfully. Okay, so that was one of the top thoughts. I believe people did not want to spend the money. However, they have no clue as to the amount of kids attending these schools and the growth in our area. The need to emphasize the need for additional schools, putting it off for later, is going to cost even more money down the road. East Central ISD is one of the most fiscally responsible districts in the city. Okay, there are people who will always vote against, even with the smallest tax increase, but a lot of what was out there was straight up fiction, frustrating. And that was widely supported, as all these were. I voted in favor of the bond, as I did when we bought it for the bond for traditional elementary. This bond had lack of advertising and communication. Communication and advertisement to the community is more important, so those that are not in favor of the bond can understand why the bond is necessary. And we did not see that many of the areas, but of groups that disagreed on specific questions, they all agreed on that one. Starting advertising about the bond earlier. People in different areas didn't understand what was being proposed, so they just voted against it. The people agreed on that. Explain to the community that other schools have had updates and renovations, and that's why they were not put on this bond. Many people were ignorant and did not do their homework, so now the schools that need to be updated with new technology to stay current won't get it. Next one, lack of information. The older people in the community, who are the ones that go out and vote, did not have enough information about the bond and its purpose. Discuss the implications of what can happen when the bond doesn't pass. People agreed on. I feel like this was a result of misinformation. Our area is due to expand rapidly, and the bond money was needed to prepare our schools. I voted yes. I voted yes for this, but what I'm hearing is that no one wants to tax increase, although minimal. That was one. And then focus on the facts and research. Info provided on the capacity was glaring, yet it was not the focal point of the presentation. And then tell people what will happen to our children when no more room is available, and give them a roundabout dollar monthly that taxes will go up. It's important for people to know how a foundation for our kids will give them a great future. Smaller class groups and not portables that could later, etc. And then it also sorts out the low, right? What did people not agree? What did both sides who disagreed on many of the thoughts, what did they all vote really low on? All right, so what were their ones and twos that everybody agreed on? The first one, recall EC School Board. The next one, we need a brand new elementary on the west side, repurpose Pecan Valley. The remodels are nice, but not the same as new. If the east gets new, the west should too. Pecan Valley can be for the police, admin, or warehouse. Budget is already overinflated. We want less administrators and office personnel and more teachers. The next one, we need a brand new elementary school on the west side, repurpose Pecan Valley. So those were the common low thoughts that were voted down. So that gives us a really nice idea from our community what they thought were the most important thoughts around the bond in our next steps. Gives us an idea about what the majority of the people who did the thought exchange agreed on, and what they didn't think was important, they agreed was not valid. So, do you have any questions about the tool or the information? Mr. T, did you?
A couple of comments.
Yes, sir.
So one of the things that this affirmed that was probably number one was we didn't use print media in our messaging. We relied on social, we relied on digital, we relied on in-person, and that's a formula that has been effective for us in the past. You'll recall that also in the past we had traditionally had a paper School Bell Times. We have a digital Tides of Pride now that goes out more frequently than School Bell Times and actually has broader engagement, but when it comes to informing the public in this community, that was a miss on our part. So definitely a strategy that includes multiple forms of print that gets into people's mailboxes and into their homes and into their hands would have been beneficial and needs to be part of the communication plan going forward. The second thing that was very prevalent was that we need to message and inform and communicate as much about the condition of the facilities in the district that aren't in the bond as the ones that are in the bond. And that there was a lot of confusion or assumptions that if a facility or a campus was not in this bond, that it was being left behind. And so we know that the long-term strategy as we were addressing growth in various sectors in our community was to make sure that no school was left behind, that every school was brought up to the same standard of amenities and opportunities for kids and staff in every facility, but that was a long-term strategy, that while we were going to build new schools in the north in 2016, we wanted to make sure all of our aged schools that were south of 87 were evaluated and that they were addressed to the extent possible, and that we completed major renovations to all of our elementary schools except for two. But having said that, that's not the only way we improve facilities and invest in our facilities and invest in safety and security and invest in energy efficiency and invest in resourcing equipment and supplies for teaching and learning. We use multiple forms of resources to do that. And so one thing that we've already realized is that in addition to making sure that we're better communicating the current condition of every facility, is provide roadmaps, scorecards, if you will. So Pecan Valley, 2016, pre-2016, here's what its condition was. 2016, here's the condition. After the bond, here are the other things that we did. Here's what we're doing this year. Here's what we're doing in the next 2 years with dollar amounts to show the total investment that the school board is making to ensure that Pecan Valley, even though we addressed it in 2016, is not being left behind. So in the future, if we put forward a bond referendum, there will be no way that a community member couldn't go to any facility and not see a poster right in the entrance that says, here's the scorecard, here's the story of this school. On the website, we give that information to Marcom, and they interview staff and interview parents, and they showcase the school in video form as well to make sure that the things that have been addressed are showcased, the things that are being addressed currently are communicated, and the things that are on the horizon in our preventative maintenance schedule program and our replacement program. In fact, this conversation just had yesterday with some constituents in the community, Ryan Ayala and his family, who is very engaged and concerned about that particular issue and the fact that there was a lot of information that he was unaware of, just like many of the community. And so doing a better job of that going forward will give our citizens the information they need to make an informed decision, where this time, because if they did turn out and vote, the orientation, if I did know enough about it, I voted no. And that's kind of what we heard from the community. The third thing that we heard is that give us more specific impact information about what now has to happen that the bond didn't pass. And if we don't address in a timely manner the need for additional facilities going forward, what does that mean for us? What is the district going to have to do? What is the district going to do to try and manage the impact of rapidly growing enrollment? And we'll talk a little bit about that tonight, but messaging about that, informing, educating the community about that, being transparent and honest. And then lastly, the tax effect. I think everybody clearly appreciated the low tax rate and the declining tax rate, particularly the interest and sinking tax rate over the last several years. But the struggle that they had was that my tax bill is still going up. And understanding that even though your school tax rate, which the school board has an influence on, is declining, and actually the lowest in Bexar County of 19 school districts, the Bexar County tax assessor sets property values. And even if your tax rate goes down a few pennies, if your property values go up $15,000, $20,000, or $40,000, you might see an increase in your overall tax bill. And there's a difference, and it's kind of complicated. And you heard some folks indicate in the survey that we talked about that and tried that. It was part of the presentation. We need to do a better job of making sure that that is something people understand a little bit better, and that we mitigate the tax impact if there's any way to do that. So I've asked Victor Quiroga from Specialized Finance to come today and talk to the board about some bond finance options that could present, one of which could present a strategy for reducing the tax burden by being a little more strategic about that particular financing pathway. And so Victor will talk to the board about that. So those are the four major ideas that we seem to have come away with. And of course, if you guys read or heard anything else, it'd be great to hear.
I just heard a lot of people that were, for the bond, but noticed that there were comments from people that were not all for it, because they have this idea that the district's just building because they want fancy schmancy buildings, okay? And I think the point we need to get across to people is the district doesn't build just to build. The district is in the business of educating. And in order to educate, you have to have facilities. So those two things are engaged together. And I think it's super important that people understand that one of the school district's responsibilities is to build. You have to accommodate. And so it appears that we're just building and we just want fancy buildings, when the reality is we have to have that in order to educate our kids. I don't know how to get those two together.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and I think that us doing a better job of communicating accurately about the current condition of every facility will give us the opportunity to talk about the design elements in these spaces and how they're adequate for the times, very flexible, limited form, a whole lot of function, and they're very adaptable spaces. And I think that if we can do a good job of helping the community see that we had a lot of other options to really embed in some really lavish designs that maybe were not as flexible and adaptable to future needs, and also very much more expensive to design and build and maintain, that's kind of on me to make sure that I'm communicating that very clearly by revealing what the condition of all of these facilities are. while they've been renovated inside out, they're not fancy buildings. They're really well-built, well-constructed, well thought of, so that they're cost-effective, easy to maintain, and they're adaptable into the future. That's been the direction we've gotten from the board. And so I have to do a good job of showcasing that, and then people can draw their own conclusions about, is this a Taj Mahal, or is this an adequate space to meet the needs that our kids have today? And is it comparable to the other schools in the district all across the community?
Well, kind of in relation to that you just said is another thing that people think that when you're addressing a school, that you didn't build it right the first time. Why didn't you build it to last? How come it needs help? Why didn't you build it the best you could? You didn't do a good job. They automatically think that there was something wrong. We didn't do well. We didn't spend the money right. We didn't build that school properly. When in reality, they don't realize how old it is. My daughter was the first class at Heritage, and she's 34. That was when Oakcrest and Salado met. And so that school's not 34 years old, but it's old, 26.
Yeah, and I remember in 2016 when we were talking about the needs and the project program that we were presenting to the community, every slide had the age of the building, when it was built, and its current age. And that was really important because the community didn't realize the age of some of our facilities. And I think that, again, going back to helping to inform the community about the condition of each facility starts with when was it built.
Exactly.
And look at it today, it's 47 years old or 56 years old, and look at its current state. And so we just have to, the feedback was very clear. We have to do a better job of.
And just to piggyback on what you said, I think we need to do a better job of getting the print copies out.
Yes, sir.
Because social media, a lot of people, I would say my age,
Yes, sir.
we don't do Facebook. We
Yep.
don't do all those things that you get it out. I think if you get a print copy in the mailboxes and people can know what's going on, and I think, because those are the ones that are doing the voting. Also, we need to make sure that people understand they want to say schools were left out. We need to do a better job of clarifying why these schools are not in this bond, and let them know exactly what was done in the past to to those schools, so they would be satisfied. I guess that's what we want to hear. The schools that they claim that wasn't in the bond. Well, I know there's probably a lot of falsehoods out there about it, but we need to make sure we clarify that. We also need to clarify, why is the district buying so much land? I hear that. Why are we buying so much land? Maybe they need to know we're buying the land for the projected crowd in 2025, so they can know we got this. I've heard we're not a real estate district. All we do is go around and buy land. So I think they need to know why are we purchasing land in certain areas, so they can understand. And I think getting the print copies out, I think would help us in the future.
Yes, sir.
That's a really good point, Mr. Mulkey, because number one, I was a little surprised, and maybe I missed the boat. I didn't know that we weren't doing any kind of print school bell times anymore. Apologize for that, but I think we really should, because a lot of people are not on the internet, and they don't have access to internet, laptops, what have you. The other thing is a lot of times when I talk to people about the projected, the study, the numbers and the company that we hire and what they say, they're like, well, who is that? What do they do? What do they do? I think we need to let people know that there really is a data-driven study that tells us, what's happening. And a lot of times, if you will, I think we were already told that what we learned for spring, we were already, it was looking scary already that wasn't going to be accurate. We were actually going to be grown past that already. So when people ask, and I say study, we've done a study, we've done an in-depth study, this company is amazing, that's what they do, but they don't understand that. So I think we could maybe include some of that words or verbiage in our print, that we do, intensive studies, and kind of explain to them about that. That we're just not picking, grabbing and picking, that we really do hire someone to do all that data.
Let me ask you another question too. I don't know, I'm just speculating too. Those committees that were involved in the priorities of what school gets this and what school got that, you know, did that help us or not? Because if they didn't get what they wanted, and they go back to their areas, and I asked for this, we asked for that, and they done the priority this a different way. I don't know if that can be worked out some kind of way to make everybody happy. I don't know, you know, because you know, I know we had a priority, we left some things off, and I'm pretty sure some of them wanted this and they didn't get that. So you know, this is a few things again. I don't know if the accuracy in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Ms. Friesen, I don't know if you want to talk about the process that the committee went through to kind of evaluate needs and then ultimately prioritize, because there definitely was a lot of needs, a lot more needs identified that ended up making it into the proposal for the board through that prioritization process.
So,
Yes.
yeah, we toured every campus, every facilities. The only one we didn't get was, the maintenance. We didn't tour that, but we got a gist of what was, what they're working with over there. But, in doing that, we saw what needed to be addressed and what didn't. I mean, and we had people that gave us the tours. We had, principals in most of them, and most of them said, we're good, we got this, and we're working with what we got, and it's great. We don't really need anything. This could be, like, Heritage is old, but it still looks amazing. They just needed a few things as far as the canopies and locker removals. We don't need those, and it would free up some space.
Yeah.
So stuff like that. But I had a lot of teachers that on social media were saying, and there could have been some principals, I don't know for sure, but we're good. I don't understand why they're saying we're leaving this school out or this school out,
Right.
because they even indicated on that forum and so on social media that we're good. So that really bugged me, because us being hands-on and seeing all these schools and stuff, and
Yeah.
then we're hearing back that, oh, we're leaving this one out and this one out, really was kind of frustrating. But we addressed everything that, I mean, we went into deep, we were there for like hours sometimes at these campuses. So I thought that the bond committee put together a pretty good package.
Okay.
So they went
When
through
we had that
that.
meeting at the cafeteria with all the committees, I mean, every project that was thought of or wanted to do, everybody got what? How many stickers you got?
So what ended up happening is they worked a couple of times at prioritizing or identifying the needs that they identified, listing them, for sharing them with one another's groups, and then kind of prioritizing their list, and then we put them all up, and they all got to go around and identify the things they felt were the most important, because we had our architects who are here tonight come in and kind of give some cost projections to all of these projects. And so that helped the committee kind of decide where the priorities were, and ultimately helped the board decide where we thought our bonding capacity could handle, considering future needs, what that amount would be that the board could support, the community could afford, and also be ready to address at the end of this demographic period, potentially a high school in the future and additional elementary schools. So the main reason everything didn't make it on the list, there were really two. One is the bottom line cost, and we just couldn't afford it all. And the other is there are other avenues for capital improvements other than bonds. So whether that's the local budget, whether that's grant funding, whether that's insurance dollars. I mean, there's things programmed in that we were able to say they're not going to make it into the bond, but we've got a replacement schedule for that, and we've got budget dollars. But those are the things that aren't broadly communicated that I think now we need to do a really good job of coalescing into, here's the story for Heritage. Yes, this is in the bond, but here's what else is being done there.
Yeah.
Complete roof replacement, complete HVAC systems, HVAC controls, security system,
I mean, painting is.
the list goes on, but
Yeah.
that's also being done during the time frame that the bond construction program might be going on, but it's just not part of the bond. And it's just important for citizens whose children attend Heritage to understand the whole picture. And we didn't do that. We didn't do a good job we just communicated about the bond itself. And to a citizen who doesn't know any better or wasn't engaged in the process, they might assume we left a bunch of stuff off and are neglecting those things. And we know they were identified.
Yes.
Because all of the documents that the committee used are available to the public, and so the public could see, wow, you guys identified like 40 things at Heritage and you only listed 8 on the bond. So we know that we've got to address those other 32. But there's other avenues, and we've got to be able to communicate that so the
It's gonna be
community gets
hard
an
to put it in
understanding.
print, but I think we can make it work, because like you said, the company who was hired to do that, they're, like you said, they were from like specifically for rapid growth, not just a demonic.
Yeah, and I just want to say, am I clear
Yeah.
on how the committee, at the end, all of the people that served on the committee that toured for all those months, when y'all got down to the very last, the way that you allowed them to, on their own, put green checks and red X's on things that they truly felt, they were able to walk up and freely do that. But when you viewed that, it gave the message that they were trying, what you saw, what was needing to be addressed was evident by that system.
Yeah,
Very clear.
they got to consensus.
Right.
I mean, they realized there's some things we were going to have to cut out and some
Yeah.
things that we just weren't going to allow to be cut out. They reached consensus.
Right.
Not everything was bondable, so I mean, do other repairs through the other avenues, is what you're saying, basically.
Yes, sir.
So,
Well, I think that there are some other important things to kind of look at, and that is just kind of the apathy in terms of voting. I saw that there were a lot of people that really did vote. I know I'm in Pecan Valley, and we have an older neighborhood, and I have people that's very familiar with the school district, know this is just the best school district and all of that. But I think sometimes when we, getting back to sometimes with the older ones and not the social media and that kind of thing, we have to remember that a lot of times with older ones, their kids, grandkids, or whatever may not even be in the district anymore, but they're still there. They're not gonna necessarily be concerned or whatever about brick and mortar kinds of things like that. Then you have to remember that then there's another groups of people that lump all school districts together, and if they start to hear some negative things or whatever, they tend to lump that together. Now, we noticed that there were other school districts that bonds didn't pass either. So we have to also think there's a lot of other things that are factors in this. Can we do a better job? We can always do a better job. I was really shocked because I've seen all the bonds, just about all of them. I can't remember anyone that didn't pass, and I remember one of them I was very directly involved in. We did a tri-chair, and we had this place packed with people, and we spent a long time talking to people and everything, and it won overwhelmingly. And so I was just naive thinking that people would continue to know that when we do present a bond, we've done our homework and we've done all other things. And so when it wasn't until near the time of the election that I started to see negative signs next to the signs that were going on, and I had never seen that for anything in our area. And I was telling my husband, I said, that's kind of odd. And then I started paying more and more attention. And of course, then a couple of people had asked me for signs, and I did. So I took that as an opportunity to, talk a little bit more and saying about that our rate was low. And a number of people know that we have a low tax rate. So it's just kind of interesting. There's just different kinds of pockets into this. I don't think it's any one thing.
Right.
I think there are a lot of different things that were grouped into this. And again, I was naive. I was shocked. I'm so accustomed to the bonds passing, and I've seen other school districts bonds that didn't pass other times. So I think we might need to take that into consideration. And based on these comments, we probably need to do a lot more a little bit later before we start to do a lot more whatever we need to do. It seems like we need to do all of these things and maybe more if there are more things so that we can get back what we used to have or whatever that was.
I think too, people are just tired of being taxed. Sometimes they may have that mentality as well too.
Well, that's a good transition to LPA, so what I asked LPA to do for the board was talk about the current context of school construction in the city of San Antonio. There's escalation in construction costs as time passes, always, but during these times it seems to be exacerbated. And so I just wanted the board to have a sense of what's going on in terms of school construction costs. And then also to share a little bit about what else LPA could offer as support for communication, for creating collateral that would be print, that could also help us inform our community more broadly and more appropriately for the large percentage or segment of our community that does not do social or digital, right? And so with that, we got Carlos Constantino here, you guys are very familiar with, and Federico Cavazos. I always like to see Federico. He's primarily responsible for the design of the Performing Arts Center, and did a fantastic job working with us. So welcome, both of you.
Well, thank you. We appreciate the opportunity. Like Roland had said, we wanted to get in front of y'all and just provide information. I know y'all want to go through and start evaluating and looking at options. And so what we want to do is, again, just give you all information like we've done before, and then let y'all continue to review and see how you want to proceed. So again, agenda-wise, talk about the local market. There's a lot going on. I want to just give you a quick, and it's an example. It's not set in stone. It's an example of a new elementary school scenario. Okay, I didn't want to get into the weeds of the entire bond and what's going to happen. We want to give you an example, relations to an elementary school that was just bid. Okay, so I want to go through that as well. And then we're going to go through, like Roland talked about, if there's any other opportunities in relation to the bond. It's funny how, when you go back to the old school, that's how things were done in the past. 10, 15 years ago, you had signs, you had pamphlets, and that's how things, unfortunately, things have sort of changed where we've left out those, that sort of segment of individuals that don't just do that. And those are the ones that go out and get voice their opinion. So I think that's a good strategy. And so as far as the market, I put these in the wrong order. So if you go back to, it's a current market slide, if y'all would go to that, I believe it's at the back, but I put that at the front. So right now, we use the source, obviously in relation to some of the work that we are in the middle of. There's a lot going on, a lot. We've also talked to Joris in relation to all of the work that they're proceeding with. And so to go over some of these school districts, y'all probably are aware of some of these, but we're going to go through them. SAISD, that's a $1.3 billion bond that passed in 2020. Real quick, Federico's literally in the middle of all that right now. We are in the middle of 3 new projects with them. I want to get Federico to go over that because that is the one that's about to start. Their proposals are right now out for CM at risk contractors. So that's going to be the big guy that's going to come out and start saturating the market. So Federico?
So of that 1.3 billion, about 2/3 of that is for construction costs. So that's around $850 million. And that is being divided up into 6 different packages, going to 6 different construction companies, general contractors. And those packages are very likely, so $650 million bonds, if you want to think about it that way. Those are going out periodically, those projects, over the next year, it's looking like. They initially were thinking they would all hit the market in May, but for the feasibility of how quickly things can get done between this upcoming May 2022 and May 2023, there will be a steady stream of 20 to $30 million, 36, 20 to $30 million school projects that hit the market. So just an awareness of that is important.
Cornell just passed their bond, believe in November as well, 2021. That is at $445 million. That is 2 new elementary schools, and those actually just bid a week ago. I will use that as an example of where the market is. It's when we talked to Joris before we came out and we asked, when was the last time you bid an elementary school? 14 months. So there's a gap between all of the stuff that's happening in relation to inflation, all the market itself, everything. 14-month gap between when they had bid their initial in elementary school and now. And they finally saw where that gap or that error was going, and it was going up. And then they also have a new middle school that I believe in about 6 to 8 months they'll be bidding. New Braunfels ISD.
Is that the only thing on there?
No, there's several more. These are the larger bullet
Big
points,
stuff, okay.
bigger stuff. There are some technology infrastructure as well. I just didn't want to get into weeds of
No
all of
problem,
that.
I'm just curious,
Yes, ma'am.
thank you.
And then New Braunfels ISD, they just passed in November 2021 a $328 million bond. They are doing some upgrades for a 9th grade center, and then also a new high school phase 1 and 2 addition, and then a new elementary school. So they're probably in the initial stages of that. Probably within that, probably I would say October, maybe somewhere maybe October, November. Medina Valley, they passed it in May of 2019. I know they've already started all their work. They have 2 new elementary schools, $107 million. And then they also have our large high school addition at Medina Valley. Navarro ISD just passed a bond in November of 2021 for $161 million. A new high school, a new elementary school, and a new sports complex. About $90 million on the high school, about $30 on the elementary, and about $35 on the sports complex. Northside ISD, so they are wrapping up their 2018 bond, and they are bidding their last, I believe it's the last elementary school on Monday, this coming Monday. And so, and then you've also just heard they've now proceeded with a new bond, $992 million for this coming May of 2021. They just came out, I believe they just passed that last week. And then Bernie ISD as well. They are going to push for a May of 2022, which is this coming year, for $175 million. They're going to push for a new elementary school and then large additions at both the elementary schools. They have taken off, what I've heard, the stadium project on this bond. So I think they're going to push until another year for that, is what I've heard. And then also to add on to that, Alamo Heights in 2023 will be pushing for a bond in May. And then there's also probably another $150 million at UTSA, probably $60 million at the Texas A&M San Antonio. What we've talked about is it's not going to change. It's going to continue to go up. And what's going to affect, per review with Joris, that we talk about, is the labor is what's going to continue to rise, because these subs are going to become more picky about what they do, and you're going to lose the good quality ones, and then they're also either going to go after it and put a premium on those costs as far as labor, because they're having hard times finding people as well. There's a really lack of labor service. So the labor is going to go up, and so that's where it's become more critical in relation to the market itself. But we are not seeing things change. On the material side, steel has gone down a little bit. It was, I'd say maybe 2-3 years ago, it was probably $2,500 a ton. It went up to about $7,500 a ton. It's come down to about $5,000 a ton now. So that's coming down. Polyiso insulation is just skyrocketed. And then lead times. You can't get steel metal deck through Volcrat for probably 10 to 12 months for steel, bar joist, metal deck. So you add that with inflation, you add that with just the cost of living, you add that the cost of, it's not going to change. And the bottom line is, you continue to push on bonds, it's only going to get more expensive. And that we've said that from the beginning, and that's what everybody's feeling. An example of that is the elementary school. So real quick, I wanted to make sure that the board understood how the numbers work. So in our estimate prior to, we were at $37 million estimate. That estimate included the hard cost, which is construction cost. It also included soft cost, fees, survey, all of the, any building permit information. That included that. FF&E, furniture, equipment, appliances, things that pertain to opening up a new school. Also all your technology, cameras, access control, which is normally in the contract, computers, equipment, things like that, and then contingency, which is what we normally apply, which is about 5% in relation to anything that comes up during construction. So as an example, 37 million was the bond for the elementary. 32 million was hard costs, and then escalation and contingency. We were at $32 million. So 5 million was soft cost, okay? Permits, fees, everything else that related to the FF&E. As an example of that $32 million number, we had reached out when we were doing that. One, we had accrued the cost of tradition, which was 22 million, and we accrued 6% for 4 years, which got us close to that 32 million. We also reached out to Joris and to Warlock about a square footage number. Cornell used the same number, $32 million. They bid it a week ago. Joris bid one. They all bid it. Joris was low, and FMW was low on the other elementary school. Came in at $415 a square foot, almost $39 million for an elementary school. Not quite, and so the number that I provided in the following slide, we provided an adjustment, which it's an example. I plan, what we want to do is, they're going through a VE process, and then they also plan, because it may be a little bit of apples and oranges in relation to scope or just, suspended slab or a 4-pipe system in lieu of rooftop units. So I don't want to say that's how far it's climbing from when we told you all 37 million to 45 million. That's a big increase. And you're probably saying, how does that happen? This is worst case scenario. They're bidding the north side elementary on Monday. We know what a standard north side school has in relation to design. It doesn't change. They follow a boilerplate of a specific design. We know CMU, suspended slab, we know 4-pipe system. We're going to make sure that we can gauge and compare to the Comal job and see if this was just an anomaly or is this where the market is. We feel like it's probably not 415. It may be 360, 350 hopefully, but it all depends on how the school is designed and if you're going, again, from a 4-pipe system to rooftop units, okay? So we've increased that. The 45 million is $360 a square foot, and that includes about 7 million of soft costs. So we're at about 36, 37, 38 million on construction, escalation, and contingency. Okay, I'm hoping that made sense. Okay, so we're going to continue to, all our contractors are our best friends. That's kind of where we're seeing and we're talking every single day. We're talking to Russell Simon, Dan Byram, all those guys at Joris. We have a really close relationship. We're saying, look, where is it at? Because it's so unstable right now. We just don't know where things are in relation to construction costs. So we're going to talk to them on Tuesday morning, and we're going to see where Northside is. And I plan to come back and review that with Mr. Toscano, and hopefully we can kind of figure out where exactly that number is in relation to a somewhat similar design that we did at Tradition, rooftop units. Also, a slide wall gravity may look at a suspended depending on conditions. No CMU on site, it was stud walls. We had CMU in the gym and the cafeteria, but other than that, we were going to use the same system. So that's kind of where we're at in relation to the numbers. It went up a lot. I think Comal was surprised. Everybody was surprised. So that's how we're going to sort of
So
react.
without putting a fine point on it, Carlos, because there is so much volatility and uncertainty, is it safe to say for the board's just mental model and for planning purposes to say that we've seen escalation around 15%?
Yes, sir.
So if you look at the $172 million that we put forward in November, depending on how much further down the road we put a similar project forward, you can add, at least right now, 15% to the overall cost
We
of
had,
that program.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
We did have that escalation cost of when we gave the number for a year. But the problem is if you extended that time frame 6 months, 8 months, you have to continue that time frame of 6 or 8 months on the escalation. Okay? So, but I would say if you wait another year to the end of this year or next year, it would be 15% easily. So that is where you're going to add another $20 million to this number that you'll have.
So 172 billion bond went to over 200 million plus.
It could be, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now, we're gonna continue to monitor. We've got a lot coming out, again, with all of these projects, in relation to the cost. Like we talked about before, we've been in touch with a lot of these, general contractors to try to understand where that market is.
We will personally see another wave of projects this summer coming out, so we'll see more. Obviously, that's after May, but we will know more.
I know that you probably, whatever direction you go, you're probably gonna have to probably make I wouldn't say assumption, but if you push for this in May, you're probably going to have to assume that you're gonna have to apply that, because we may not quite have all of those numbers in relation to these bonds, because the ones we talked about are spread out a little bit, and so that's where you're going to have to probably make a decision in relation to that escalation cost. But I would say 15% is probably a good number. If you waited till November, maybe not quite much for May, maybe another 6 to 8 to 10%. But if you waited till November, I would say 15%.
I would say this is why it matters, the thoughtfulness of the design, why it's important to, make that such a priority to make each dollar go a little farther than it used to.
Yeah, and we're, as a whole, that is always something we're always watching, especially now, when we know that the market is just so hard we are being very cognizant of our design, okay? And so we want to make sure that we don't, because what happens is you get into, you've got to react to that, and the reaction means you got to start taking stuff out, and that's what's unfortunate. You're going to now impede and sort of change the initial design. That's exactly what they're doing at Comal. They're looking at BE items now, and they're trying to find another $5 or $6 million of savings, and it looks like they might have found that, which then somewhat tells me that there might have been, I'm not going to say this too loud, a little bit of a fluff, maybe, a little bit of some extra design, you could say. I know there were some larger numbers in playground equipment, et cetera. I don't know the extent. I don't want to insinuate or say that, but that's where we have to make sure that we're really watching what we're doing and making sure that we understand what things are. And that too adds to maybe the CM at risk process, where we can continue if they get on board early, and I'm not going to tell you which direction to go. Those were all CSP. I will say that. Comal was CSP. So just everybody, y'all know the difference between CSP and CM at risk? If not, I can quickly explain. CM at risk is just a straight bid. It's let's say you have 10 contractors, they bid through the review, they get the drawings at the same time, they bid, you provide a date, they give you a number, and you evaluate that. CM at risk, and they're getting numbers from
CSP.
I'm sorry, CSP. They're getting numbers from several subcontractors, they're doing an evaluation, and they're probably picking maybe the lowest one, because that then will help in them being low in their bid. And CSP it's an evaluation where the GC is evaluating from beginning costs, evaluation of I'm sorry, CM I'm sorry guys, I'm talking too much. I got it here. CM at risk is where they're upfront, they're giving you the market, they're working with you in design, materials, and then they're coordinating with subcontractors and they're negotiating. And they're reviewing their scope, seeing if there's any holes, etc. And then that's how they proceed. So you put this GC on board early to make those decisions early on.
Typically providing a guaranteed maximum.
And it's a guaranteed maximum price, that is correct. And at the end of the day, savings come back to you in that process in relation to changing evaluation of contracts, etc. No savings on CSP. That's basically just put it back in their pocket, other than contingency. So
So the high school
Yeah,
renovations
sorry.
and the elementary renovations in 2016 were all CMAR, which they were on board early. They worked together with the architect in the design to make sure that the design supports the functionality of the building and the cost that we're expecting that guaranteed maximum price, right? Like we want to be within that. In CSP, it's bid, and then they get with the design team later. So they're not working together on that process. And so there's pros and cons to both, but we were talking about CM at risk for all of the renovations in this particular project and considering either of the two for the new schools.
That's the way the entirety of the SCISD bond is being handled, by the way.
Can I don't know if I ask you a question or Mr. Castano? This bond in New Braunfels that passed in November 2021, I thought only a portion of that bond passed.
You're correct.
Well, how do you put that on a ballot like that?
They did propositions. So.
Yeah, so one of the things we'll talk about here in a little bit is some scenarios. Because we traditionally done the entire referendum on one proposition. So you can break that referendum up into multiple propositions. You could group new construction together, renovation together, and district support facilities together. And individual voters could vote, they would vote for each of those separate. They can vote yes for some and no to others.
That's okay, that's how you do it. And that's
Yes,
why
sir.
some of it was passed and some
Some
of it
passed,
was.
some
Because that's
failed.
what I was understanding, only some of that bond passed.
Correct, and it was done strategically because what didn't pass was athletics. Yeah,
That didn't pass across the
that didn't pass at all, actually. So Judson,
Yeah, I saw that.
Judson.
They didn't pass
they
across the state.
entire bond.
Athletics didn't pass across the
Exactly.
state.
So, they just understood that we want to give them options, give the community options.
Gotcha, okay.
And
That's
so,
how you put it on the bond.
Yes, sir.
And so real quick, again, in relation to additional services or services that we've done that we can provide as well, or even a third party one. There's companies that we've talked about before in relation to specifics of them focusing on community engagement, et cetera, things like that. But really, it's what we've done, facility assessment, diagrams of the master plan solution, kind of sort of what we had talked about, what we had done prior to cost estimates. We could get into a little bit more of the weeds of more detailed cost estimates in relation to things that are being bid. Bond presentation resources also as well.
This is where a lot of the things you talked about, maybe
Correct.
print media, the way that you articulate when schools have been renovated last in a graphically clear way. That helps a lot of people understand complex information in a simple way. That could be a great tool for you.
And then, I guess, again, additional marketing material. These could be flyers that we talked about, signs on your house. It could be water bottles you pass out in the football games. Who knows? Things like we've done that before. And then coordination with financial consultant. I believe y'all have already engaged in that as well. Review of demographics updates, which I believe y'all are already in the middle of as well. Community engagement, going out and really, I think y'all somewhat, or y'all are working to pinpoint where that engagement needs to be in relation. So if that's additional presentations, that's getting out in the streets and talking more about that. And then the bond strategy scenarios. And so those were options that whether you do something, maybe it's a smaller bond now, you do some of the rest of it on a lighter bond, those things we can also assist in relation to specifics and strategies of that. And I don't know if everyone wants to get into that, but that would be another option of maybe doing elementary school in first and then doing the rest of those a year later. And knowing that you've got priorities in North Elementary School. So we could assist.
So LPA has the ability to help in addition to what they've done for us in the past at providing some of that print media, some of that informational content that we were talking about earlier so the community understands the investments that we are and will continue to make in each facility. We've done town hall kind of workshops in the past. I remember being in St. Hedwig's community at City Hall with the community, really working on their expectations and design elements and things that they wanted to be considered in any future facilities out there. Engagement in workshop kinds of interactions. But also there are third-party consultant groups that come in and help you really do scientific surveying. They help you really line up tightly to what the community's perceived needs and expectations of us are, and then help us message that in ways that maybe we won't miss that print media opportunity, trying to do it ourselves, just as a for example. And so those are all things to consider with our architects, but also for the board to consider going forward in terms of bringing in a third party that really helps with all of that, so the community has good info. At the end of the day, it's not to convince the community one way or the other, but make sure they have all the facts and all the information, and that it's far-reaching. It's not just some of the community that have kids in school or connected to school that are engaged, they got the information, but the entire community. And we do it in ways that don't wait for the community to come to us. Those days are over. You know, we gotta
Well, I
get
mean,
into
we're
this.
seeing, we had concerns about rising costs. We didn't get this past bond election done.
Yes, sir.
I mean, but that was a concern. I mean, we all talked about, you know, and we're seeing that come to fruition here now. So
Yeah.
we're either gonna have to, we're back in the position of the school district just building what we have to build instead of what we, other percent, you know what I'm saying? We're back in the same way. We're always just building what we have to build to get by. The next emergency. That's what we're doing right now. We're looking for the next emergency, which is the growth. So we're gonna have to address that. And there are other facilities that need the attention and need the extra, that we need improvements on, are gonna either have to just wait until the money's there, or through fund balance or some other means, or the community gets back behind the school district and behind, and really understands what our needs are as a whole. Not just individual needs, but as a whole.
Well, you know, I hope that we don't leave from this thinking that we didn't do a good job, and that there weren't enough town halls, and there wasn't enough, it was done well. You know, I also hope that there won't be any purposed, conflicting propositions also on that, because that, you know, people take a lot of stuff from things, and then they just get to the point where they just go, oh, you know,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. So there are a lot of different kinds of factors that actually, I think, didn't have so much to do with East Central as a district, but it was just the attitude and just kind of what was kind of going on at the time. And so, you know, people tend not to trust people, or trust things, or if there's more money, you know, they come up with all of these other kinds of ideas. But everybody that I've always known that said, when I talk about East Central or whatever, throughout the city and past the city or whatever, know that this is an amazing school district. And so we can't allow, even though it didn't pass, and even though we probably need to, like me, not be so naive and think it's always going to pass because we're so wonderful, and we are. But I think we could just take note from what we've got, and then methodically plan this out and take into consideration all the things that we're saying. And I believe we've been successful. I do.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, a lot of what you said. I think there is a mistrust that, you know, when my wife and I voted that morning in China Grove, I mean, we were third, I was second, I was third, my wife was second, there was a gentleman in front of us, and he went and voted, and once he voted, he was standing there, and my wife and I got up, and he said something about, I can't remember, he said, well, if I'd known you were on the ballot, meaning me, he said, I would have voted for you. I said, we were. I said, you know, East Central Independent School District, oh no, they got lots of money, they don't need no more money. And so there is a mistrust about what people think about how much money the school district does and what we're supposed, you know. And so, but how, and everybody I talked to when we were trying to get the bond passed or out promoting the bond and stuff like that, is they, you know, I told them that, you know, I brought to what I was talking about a while ago, that, you know, if we don't get it passed now at this cost, it's going to be a greater expense. Do the same thing a year later, or 6 months later, or whatever. It's not going to get any better than what it is right now. And I told that to everybody, and they just don't believe you, and that's the problem. I don't know if it's a you know, print media, social media, whatever. I just, you know, convincing the public is very tough.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons that I got on the board all those years ago was one of the main things I felt like that I wanted to do was convey information to my friends, my community, my people from the daycare that had young children. And there was always a stigma that the board were just sneaky bad people, you know? I mean, I really hate to see that. I mean, one of the real things I've tried to do is take away that stigma by being transparent, by being approachable. And I want to take that away. I want people to know that we're actually good people trying to do good things. That there's no reward behind being sneaky or underhanded or trying to push something through that we don't need. We're not like that. That's not what it's all about. You know, there's no reward there for us. And we work for the community and the children. But to try to, the negativity, you know, that's a part of the negativity, is to portray the board as being untransparent and bad people, and that we just want to waste money. And we pay the admin too much. And if we take that away, we can pay for that. You know, I mean, that's that old story out there. And I just really think that it's sad, because that's part of what we're fighting.
Well, I mean, one of my biggest pet peeves, and everybody knows me, knows what my biggest pet peeve is for this district. And every time I go to a football game, I go up there and I look at that press box that was built in 1982 when you and I graduated, and it's still there. And I'm thinking, we're a 6A school. Why do we have a press box that nobody can use, and it's falling apart? And I mean, we never can get past of just doing the emergency thing now. We're always putting Flexall. I told Roland this. I said, we're putting Flexall on everything just to get it passed. And I said, we're never going to improve our athletic facilities because we never can get past it just building what we have to build.
A lot of the big
I agree with you
athletic
there.
centers though get their money from big business.
Do
and
what?
they have big
I agree with you.
Right?
Well, I mean, one of the biggest things is, and I'm just gonna say it, is the reason that these school districts get what they get is because their community gets behind them.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're not worried about, you know, $9 or how many ever dollars. They want their kids to have the best. And they want their kids to have, and maybe it's not the fanciest or whatever, but it's functional, it works, it's flexible, everything that you just said a while ago. And they don't hesitate. It's for the kids, they hear kids, they're done. So.
No, I mean, we still have one high school, and everybody's going to graduate from that high school that's in this district. So everybody, you know, ends up there.
Yeah, and we don't even need that yet, but that's another story. Anyways, thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Carl.
guys.
Thanks a lot.
You just told me what I already knew, though.
We appreciate it though, those are some good, that's good information.
It's kind of hard to deliver, but.
Yeah, it's tough.
Those bond, those are mind-blowing amounts of money.
It is.
Yeah, and they're little bitty baby.
So speaking of money, we've got
The money man.
Victor Carogi
Oh, that's
is here with us to talk a little bit about bond financing.
Victor, we only want good stuff.
And Victor, the temperature's getting hot in here now, so
Now, what I
you might want
mentioned-
to try to throw some water on it somewhere.
What I mentioned to Victor was that some of the feedback we'd gotten was just, you know, we're just worried about tax increases. You know, as I mentioned before, I get it, I got a low tax rate, you're right, I see it, a school tax rate, but by God, my values are going up, my tax bills going up, and I appreciate you telling, you know, all that hard work to keep our taxes low, but my taxes are not low, they're going up. And so the tax impact for the bond and any future bond is a concern for some in the community. And so I wanted Victor to talk to the board about options, and maybe there could be ways to try and at least mitigate that
Yeah.
some, while still being really responsible
Yeah.
in the financing of a bond. And you have Victor's presentation in your folders.
We're trying to work in some anticipation and I think y'all can hear y'all. Thank you for having me here. We were invited to give you a little bit, few more structuring options to try to cover some of your needs. After the election results in November, we got together and we're kind of delving into it, and we were asked to update the financing models to see what the tax impact would be. And so we wanted just to visit with you just a couple of different ways to potentially look at structuring the bonds if you decide to go back out again. But the first thing here, and this is all on the handout in front of you too, is there's a bond capacity. In the state of Texas, there's only a certain amount that school districts can afford, and not only what the voters think they could afford by way of taxes, but also what the state says that you could afford. And so by law, we're limited to how much we could borrow. So they're looking at two things. The biggest driver as to how much you could afford as a school district is going to be your property values. And here, it's a unique situation in that you have a pretty strong property tax base, but we know that it's growing because we see that it's growing with the homes coming up and the development happening. So that's something that we have to keep in mind and that we could actually plan for if we use certain structures in planning for this debt. But with that, we have to look at how much debt we have outstanding right now, which for a district our size is somewhat limited. We have about $110 million outstanding. And then also how much can we fit in there. So those are the two biggest drivers, but the biggest driver as to how much you can afford and your capacity is going to be the property values you have here currently. So with all those two factors in mind, the state of Texas says your INS or your interest in sinking fund tax rate can't be more than 50 cents per $100 valuation, and right now we're about 21.6 cents. So we know we have quite a bit of room there still. So with those two factors right now, East Central ISD, our bond capacity currently is about $340 million. That's the max under state law that we could afford. But we were asked just to run different analysis. But when we look at these, there's two different structures, and if you want to kind of look at it just like on a spectrum, the first structure that we use, and many districts for many years have used for a long time, is called a level repayment structure. So if you think about, with a mortgage, each month, most of the time if you got a fixed interest rate, each month that annual principal and interest payment is going to be the same each month for the next 30 years if you don't refinance or pay down early. And so the first structure that a lot of districts use is called the level repayment structure. Kind of the same idea. If they issue a 30-year bond, that annual payment is going to be the same each year. And so that structure is fine if you're not really concerned about the tax impact or the tax rate that your taxpayers are going to pay. And so if that's not a big concern, then that type of structure is fine. And over the life of 30 years, that interest cost is going to be the least amount that you could potentially have it without paying it off early. So the second structure is kind of on the other side of the spectrum. There's no right or wrong, it's just a different idea and a different structure option. The second side, or the other side, is called a structured debt payment structure. And so here we have the opportunity to massage the new bonds into your existing debt profile. We know that over the years we've issued bonds that are going to be paid off, as time goes on, but they're not all going to be paid off at the same time that the existing bonds are. So we have an opportunity with on the way we structure a new bond program and kind of wrap around the new debt around your existing debt, all with the goal of being very sensitive to the tax rate impact. And so what the voters will see is that they'll be able to maybe afford a little bit more, and the tax impact won't be as great as the level debt structure. So historically, the East Central ISD, we've used the first option, the level debt service option. A lot of it was because for a very long time, we were considered a property poor school district. And whenever we did bonds, we were able to participate in state funding programs that the state offered at the time for property poor school districts. At one point, we were able to pass a bond when I started my career in the early 2000s here, we were able to get about 70 to 80 cents on the dollar from the state of Texas. So when you participate with those type of programs, the state actually requires you to do that first level debt service structure. Here, that's not the case anymore. Our property values have essentially outpaced our enrollment growth, so we're not as poor as we were back then. So those are the general ideas. So let's just take a look here, what the difference is in terms of how much we borrow and what the tax rate is going to be. So it's quite a bit of numbers, so it's probably better maybe if you do have it in front of you. So the top box there, this is the level repayment structure. This is what we've done in the past historically with the district. And so I'm just going to pick out a couple of bond amounts. I'll go with the $50 million first, and I'll just kind of go line by line for you there. So if you go on the top left there, the level debt service scenario, we're looking at $50 million. We're assuming that we have a May 2022 bond election. This is just for this scenario. I'm not saying that you have to do this. We would issue the bonds in August 2022. We would do a 30-year bond. The interest rate, believe it or not, that's still a little bit of cushion in there. We're a little bit lower now, but they are going up. It's about 3%, 3.02% was I'm planning. The total debt service, that's how much we would pay over the life of the bond. Currently, on the next line, the existing interest and sinking fund tax rate, that's 21.6 cents. If we were to use a level debt service payment structure for a $50 million bond, the increase that we would see as a homeowner would be 1.1 cents to cover $50 million bonds. Okay, so I'm going to go over to the right side for a $200 million bond. Same idea, same assumptions, but now we're trying to plan for and see what would a $200 million bond cost us using a level repayment structure. For a $200 million bond using a level repayment structure, we're looking at a tax rate increase of just under 16 cents per $100 valuation. So our INS tax rate to cover it for a $200 million bond will go from 21.6 to 37.45 cents per $100 valuation. Again, we're not being sensitive to tax rate, we're just trying to see, we're going to fit this in, how much it's going to cost. So the second option, structured option, is there at the bottom. I'll call it structured, or you could call it deferred or wraparound. But basically here, I'm purposely wrapping around this new debt around your existing debt portfolio so I can minimize that tax impact. So we'll look at the $50 million bond program first. Here, I'm purposely trying to massage the new bond program into your debt portfolio. So instead of a 1.1 cent tax rate increase for $50 million, we could actually fit that in without a tax rate increase. And if we look at a $200 million bond program, and I'm using this structure where I'm massaging it, making it fit your portfolio, trying to reduce the tax rate, instead of 15 or close to 16 cents, we're looking at under 10 cents, at about 9.7 cents to pay for a $200 million bond. So there is a cost, basically. If we basically, for me to reduce the initial tax rate impact for you, what I'm doing is I'm kind of pushing that principal payment down the line. But that might not be a bad thing for a district like East Central ISD, because we know that the residential growth is coming. So I think sometimes the concern is, well, we're going to do this big bond. I've been a homeowner here for many years. Why do I have to pay for it when we know that these other homes are coming up? Well, this type of structure, a lot of times, if you're not relying on state aid, which we're not anymore to make our debt payments, this type of debt structure might be more beneficial to you in that we're making these improvements that these homeowners or the new residents that are building homes and coming in could also have, I don't like this term, fair share of it, but they get to participate in it later too, because me as a homeowner that lives here right now, I'm not paying the brunt of it now. I know that the way the debt is structured, the people that are coming in and building new homes and the homes that are coming in online are going to participate in this bond program that we're actually voting in right now. There's a lot of analysis there too, but I'm just going to, if it's okay if I could just walk you through one, and I'll just show you the differences. And I'm just going to go down the line. I apologize, I don't think mine has page numbers, but let's go to the $200 million one. And again, I'm not saying you need to do $200 million or advising that you should do $200 million, but this will, you'll be able to kind of see the difference. And this is under that first section called level debt service structure. Numbers are a little small there, but just let me know when you all get there. We're okay? Okay. So I'm just going to cover a couple things here. This is the INS tax rate impact model that you've seen, and this is the level debt service structure. Again, I just want to show you in detail what we look at here. So a couple of things. I'm still being pretty conservative in my models. I'm still assuming relatively conservative interest rates. There's still somewhat of a cushion. But depending on how long you continue to wait too, there's not only a risk about inflation and construction costs going up, but we all look at the news and interest rates are also going up. And we've seen that this week as well, even in the municipal bond world. So the other thing I believe I'm still somewhat conservative is the property values that I'm using under this analysis. Let me just take you column by column if that's okay. The first column, that's just your fiscal year. The second column is your property values. Right now we have about $4.7 billion in property values that we're able to use to pay for our debt, and that's the way we calculate our INS tax rate. What I'm assuming is that over the next 2 years, we're going to grow by about 7% per year, which, you know, potentially could be still pretty conservative and still pretty low. After that, I'm assuming only a 1% growth. And so again, I'm being pretty conservative here. What I want to do is I want to give you the worst case scenario so that when you're talking to your voters, you're also giving them the worst case scenario when it comes to the tax rate. And so that's column C, that's the projected growth there. So again, still pretty conservative. Column D there, that's your existing debt service structure. These are the bonds that we have on the books right now. And as you can see there, over time, right now, our annual payment's about $9.5 million. And then in 2028, it goes down by about $1.4 million. Now we're only paying $1.8 million. And then as we pay off debt, it just continues to go down. So, but this analysis here, the level, I'm not really paying attention to that. I'm just putting in a 30-year bond, and in this case, a $200 million bond, and that's in column F there. So the reason why we call it level is because you see those annual payments each year. Based on these conservative assumptions, the annual payments are going to be $10.2 million. So I'm not being sensitive to your tax rate, I'm just saying I'm trying to fit in this $30 million bond. You go over there all the way to the far right there, that'll take in column L and column M, it takes your tax rate from 21.6 up to that close to 16-cent tax rate increase to pay for that bond. Here, this will generate the least amount of interest cost over the life of the bond. So if it's okay, I'll just go down to the last page. I don't think you need a page number for it. This is the start of your packet. This is the very last page, and this is under the structured debt scenario. Here, everything is the same. All the columns that I just described to you, the assumptions, everything's the same. The only difference is if you could look at column F, instead of the annual payments being $10.2 million per year for 30 years, you can see what I'm doing there. I purposely made them lower. Instead of 10.2, the very first year, I tried to fit it in and said, let's just only put in $7 million of debt payments. And then as we continue to pay off our existing debt, those annual payments go up. So you can see there in column F, it goes from 7 million to 8.1. Then 8.5, then it jumps to 10.4. As we continue paying off existing debt, I'm pushing up the new bond program. So this is where I say that people that are building homes, and they might not be here for another year or two, as they come and participate as taxpayers, then at that point they start also participating in this bond program. And the one thing to keep in mind is that as your property values go up, our INS tax rate won't have to be as high. So hopefully these are still super conservative property value assumptions here, so that if you do grow higher than the 7% per year or 1% per year later on, that INS tax rate won't have to be as high. But here, for a $200 million bond program, instead of 16 cents, it's going to be under 10 cents. If I do this structured scenario when I'm trying to fit this bond around your existing debt payments. I'll be happy to answer any questions. I know that that's quite a bit, but I just want to let you know, you do have an option of being a little bit more sensitive to the INS tax rate if you're trying to fit in a larger bond program. It doesn't have to cost as much as that traditional debt structure that we've historically used here at the district.
Thank you, Victor.
Thank you so much, Victor. Appreciate it.
The numbers are pretty clear.
Ready to move on?
So the board does have an option of calling for a May 2021 election, a November 2021 election, or a May, 22, or May 23. Something to keep on your radar in addition to everything that was shared today that I know you got to really process. There's some urgency around the changing context. I know there was already urgency from the board because we knew this was coming, which is why we tried to get this out in front of voters this past November. But There is some work at the legislative level, and has been, it's not new, it just didn't make it through this last session, but it's already one of the governor's priorities, and will definitely get some airtime in the next session, and that is that bond elections in the future are considered failures if they don't get at least 2/3 of the community's vote. Currently, it takes a majority, 51% wins. In this scenario, a bond that is 65% in favor fails. If it's not 66% of the vote, 2/3 of the vote or greater, a school bond will be considered a failure. That is something potentially a reality on September 1st, 2023. It's got to make it through the process, but it worked its way through special sessions this past legislative session and got negotiated out. But it was certainly on the tail end of a pattern where, the bond language had to explicitly state this is for a tax increase. Even in districts where there was no tax increase, it had to say that. Non-academic facilities have to be separate on a property. They can't be coupled with a proposition with academic facilities. And we've seen the last 2 rounds of bond elections that the 86% or greater of athletic bonds have failed. And so there are some things legislatively happening that make bond communication more complex and bond success less likely. And that's just something on the horizon. So I would say that the board needs to consider May 2022, November 2022, or May 2023. What we also have prepared for you today, just for your knowledge, and we've got some handouts, but I don't think you'll need them. We know that tradition was going to be at 120% capacity in 2023. We know that that's our first major challenge with regard to the enrollment increase. We also talked last board meeting, the board approved $400,000 for us to stand up portables. The additional enrollment capacity that those portables are adding will take tradition, assuming that the demographic projections are not going to change. They're what they were when PASA did that study for us last year. Will take us to close to 2025. The board has commissioned PASA again, who is from College Station. They are highly regarded as the fast growth demographic agency in the state of Texas. Districts all over the place, Northside, Shirt-Cibolo, and fast growth communities here and around the state use PASA because they do a very invasive study. We have found their resources from their last study to be uncanny in terms of their accuracy. You guys have hired them again to update that, and in April, you're going to hear their findings. Their findings might blow up everything I'm saying right now. If they don't change, the portables will give us close to 2025 at tradition from 2023. The second thing we're working on is looking at school boundaries to balance enrollment between legacy and heritage. If we can flip 250 to 300 students over the next few years from tradition, from heritage to legacy, then we can buy ourselves a little bit more time, because heritage was going to be at 120% capacity in 2024. That'll push us out to 2026. It'll then bring legacy from 2030 to 2028. But it buys us time to. So part of what's going to happen as a result of the bond not passing is portables, school boundary changes, phase 1. Phase 2, we may have to look at some programming changes at our elementary schools and reconfigure school boundaries at every elementary school to try and capture, by balancing enrollment across all of our elementary schools, 400 to 500 seats. Phase 4, or phase 3 rather, is going to be potentially looking at cap and move situations where schools at certain grade levels have exceeded capacity and we no longer have room there. We're going to have to shift the child who lives in one school boundary to another school adjacent the next closest school that has room. And that's somewhere we hope to never be. But all the while, we'll be using every available space in these schools when these strategies aren't enough. Meaning, any space that is open, like a classroom during a conference period, is now filled with other students, teachers floating into other, I don't have a classroom, I float into teachers' classrooms, and maybe 5 or 6 classrooms throughout the day, so that I fill those spaces when the assigned teacher's not in them. Cafeterias outside of lunch and gymnasiums outside of PE or athletics. Library when there's no rotations of students going through there, or maybe a class is in the library in a rotation and the other half is quartered off for instruction. Those are all things we've done in the district in years past that are what I describe to the community as short-term strategies to get us the bridge. It's the bridge to get us where we need to be. Right now, it's a little bit more of a sense of urgency, and it's not going to be a bridge for long. And in April, we're going to know just how long. Because we expect the demographic findings to be more profound than the last, because we've already identified several large subdivisions. The dirt is already moving, and they weren't in, because it's happening so fast that it wasn't in the study, even as invasive as Paz's study was. So it's very plausible that in April, what I just told you is going to be completely undone. We're going to do that just to be where we were. Very possible. And so we'll know more in April. So no decisions for the board to make tonight. Really need to stew on it. If we're going to call for a May 2022 election, we have to the middle of next month to make that decision.
So what we need to think about is if we do call for a bond next month, in the next month's meeting, you know, what is that bond going to look like, I guess, right? I mean, do we deal one school, we just go with what we need right now? Or, you know, what a bond package might look like, or what y'all think, what we want to do? One school, 2 school, do the whole thing that we just did, come back with the same thing. It's going to be, we all know it's going to be upwards of cost. Do we want to try that, or just do what we want to do?
So are we gonna stew on this and then have a get together again before the cutoff date to file is and get what everybody's thoughts are? Or how do y'all wanna do that?
We can do that.
But Mr. T, that information that you just relayed to us, why we didn't relay that information before the last
We
bond?
did.
Exactly what he just said? I don't know.
All
Yeah,
of
we
it.
did.
All of
Did
it.
we?
Website.
Everything that
all
he
of
just
it.
said?
Yeah.
Except for not in print, right? So,
Yeah.
so,
Okay.
so everything was well communicated, but we now know not broadly communicated.
Where to
Right,
go.
so there was a
Okay.
large percentage of our voter base who are not directly connected to our school system maybe anymore. No kids in school or no
My
work in the
father-in-law was one
system.
of them that said he did not vote for it.
So
Until
say again,
we had
again.
conversation, my father-in-law
Yes.
said, I didn't vote for it, I'm not gonna vote for it, whatever.
Okay.
And then
And
we,
after knowing
yeah.
all this, what he just
he
said.
said, I wish I would've known, I'm so sorry. So, and he's 65 plus,
Yeah.
no social media.
Well, but that presentation you just made, I think you ought to put that in print and get that out to the community, because to see exactly how urgent this bond needs to be passed.
I think.
The problem is that people just don't believe you.
They don't believe.
They just
well,
don't believe.
They
They
don't
think
believe.
school
that you-
money, school districts just rolling with money everywhere.
Okay,
They
so
just don't
that's,
believe it.
yeah, well, okay,
That's a
just don't
really good
believe.
point.
What he just said, what he just said, that seemed like that's an emergency.
I agree with you. That's
Yeah.
a
Why
good-
can't we
good
put
point.
it as props like the other districts did?
Mhm.
Get the word out there and take our chances with what gets voted through. Like you said, the educational buildings, were they separated on there as propositions, or was just, you listed them? It was just listed,
Yeah,
right?
so this particular ballot had it, the board decided that they wanted to do
Yeah.
one proposition.
Yeah.
And so it was all listed very specifically and transparently, but it was vote yes or no for all or
So if we
nothing.
do different propositions.
It is also another option, to
I
break
mean, we
the
still need to
bond.
push the print and push, and get the word out, because I think a lot of people were uneducated
Right.
and seeing all the negative, and that really frustrates me. I'm with you. We are a community of, I have roots here. I went to school here. My husband's parents were Hornets. We have roots, and it's confusing to me why
Yeah.
everybody, not everybody, but there's so much negativity. Like you said, everybody thinks that we're not being transparent and, we're so stinky. But where's the positivity? And this trickles down to, are you having conversations in front of your kids? Because my kids know positivity, and my kids know we do this for the greater good and for all kids in the district, not just what they're gonna need. And that's frustrating to me. It really frustrates me.
It's just, it's communication, you know, there's some there are gaps in, why, way smarter person than me once said that where there's voids in communication, negativity fills the space.
Yes.
And so it is very clear to me that I missed some opportunities to get this same information in the hands of enough people in our community. Because given that information, I think we've all learned that folks say, okay, I think this makes sense, this is reasonable.
And not just that.
But without that information, they're gonna make assumptions that are generally negative.
Us just reaching out to them.
Yeah, so it's not-
Because there's a disconnect with the community.
I believe our community would get behind what our kids need if we do a better job communicating. And that's my job to do that better, now that I've learned some lessons here. And the context are just different than they've ever been in the past, Ms. Dill. And maybe we underestimated that or didn't quite understand the climate and the context today. It's, you know, there's a lot of anxiety and there's a lot of distrust or mistrust, and it was here before we put a bond referendum out. You know, so we just gotta learn from it, put forward what we think is right for the community. I mean, we did get a lot of really good feedback about what was in the bond. I mean, I think there were some folks that felt like some things were left out, but I gotta do a good job of ensuring folks and showing folks how those things are going to be addressed. It's just not in the bond. I didn't get a lot of feedback that suggested that anything in the bond was unnecessary or that they weren't appropriate, reasonable solutions to the problems we were trying to solve. I got a little feedback that we probably need to take a second look at the junior highs and make sure that, you know, Mr. Monkey, you made a comment, but we'd originally had the same dollar amount at each junior high. Of course, the scope was different at both, but it was the same dollar amount. And then we did an evaluation. We had our architects walk and kind of look at the real need and prioritize the need at both campuses, and the need was greater at Heritage. Of course, it's an older school. But there are some needs at Legacy that are reasonable to address at this time. They could have made that dollar amount comparable. So that there's equity and equality, and the reality of it is if I'm not in the game, I can see that as an inequity. And that was something that we should have considered, and you asked, and we didn't. And I think the decision we made was for the right reasons, but but it was a strategy that would have conveyed fairness to folks who were concerned about that, and we did. So I think there's an opportunity to revisit that even. I mean, the floors and paint in that building need to be done. Not as badly as Heritage, but it does need to be done. Add that to the scope, and you're investing the same dollar amount in both schools and getting both of those schools up to a really great place, like a future junior high would be.
So, I mean, all the meetings that we did have, I went to over half of them. I mean, everything that, when we left the presentation, everything was positive, everybody was on board. I mean, it's not those people, because those people are involved in the communities anyway. We gotta find out, find the ones that are the negative side, and find the ones that are not believing what we're saying. That's the people we need to reach and explain to them and say, this is where we're at.
Well, when those portables started popping up, then they're believers. And putting them in the cafeteria and stuff like that. Because
But we can't wait that long.
Yeah, but
That's the problem.
you know what I mean?
We
don't have to do
gotta
something.
get their attention, but I mean,
Well, I don't know how you make them believe you.
Yeah.
That's hard, yeah.
James is
Come
ready
on.
to vote now, you know.
All right,
But are we feasibly, with everything we've heard and learned and shared tonight, can we feasibly take all of that in and get this done in that timeline? Because it's gonna be a lot of work.
So I'm really concerned about May and really being able to get information into the hands of the broader community that we did not do well last time. I mean, that's a short runway period to get all of that collateral created, published, distributed, and then have the time to have enough conversations among the
Everybody
community.
that I've spoken with about it, they say November.
Are we gonna talk about it now, or are we gonna go home and talk about it and come back and vote? Because
I think we have to have another meeting between now and.
Yeah, it's not an action item.
I know, that's what I'm
but
saying,
yeah.
so.
No,
We need to go do on what we were
Yes,
told,
ma'am.
Yeah.
and then we're gonna come
Yes,
back.
ma'am.
Well, I'll call a meeting before our next regular scheduled board meeting, and we'll
Okay.
have a special meeting, and then we'll decide what we're gonna do. But,
Mhm.
so, we'll have lots of meetings.
Before February, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks.
Okay, I have one more question. Is it feasible, let's say we go with May, is it feasible to get some more resources in to help us get that? Like hire a consultant
Yes, ma'am.
or do something like that? I mean,
Absolutely.
we putting everything into this.
Well, if we're-
and so we've gotta make sure.
If it's November 2022, absolutely. If it's May 2022, and between now and our next convening, I will touch base with a consultant that was referred
And
to.
I'm for using kids too, you
I agree.
know. If I had some grandchildren, I'd put them out
We
there.
need to decide what we wanna do and how we wanna do it in the next, so between now and our next special meeting, we just need to say, do we wanna go out with the whole bond package, what do we wanna do?
Okay,
That's what we need to focus on, look at the stuff, we'll back up the stuff that we are on the last bond election, and see, okay, do we wanna do this whole thing again, or do we wanna just do the schools, or what, you know, 1 school, 2 schools, 3 schools? Because we're looking at a considerable amount of money difference in cost, and what people might wanna vote for, and what they might not vote for. Right now, you know, we gotta decide what we wanna do.
All right.
I'll, between now and that next meeting as well, I'll put some scenarios together that you might consider, right? Multiple propositions, you know, maybe reduce the amount of this particular bond and prioritize the most pressing needs, and then plan for coming back to the community in a year or two with some of the additional items. And again, this is presuming April's not gonna blow all this up, and we can buy ourselves a couple of extra years with portables and boundary changes, right? But I'll put some scenarios together just to help the board kind of wrap their minds around the possibilities and the pros and cons to each. Okay?
Roland, we'll get back to you on the numbers on the elementary school,
Okay.
which may give you a gauge of how that arrow is, you know, pointing in relation to
Yeah.
of where we're at. So we'll have that information midweek next week, and I'll be able to share that with you. And
Okay.
that may give you a bigger, smaller picture of the big picture of numbers.
Yes, sir.
All right. We'll move on to the action agenda items, 6.1, employee salary schedule 2022-2023. Mr. Escon?
Trustees, this is a very unusual time in my career as it relates to staffing in public education. You've definitely seen all over the news that there are shortages of teachers, unfilled positions all year long in every district in the San Antonio area. And that most recently, we're also starting to see terrible fill rates for substitutes. That was exacerbated by, you know, each surge of the virus. And so the market, the supply demand for teachers is different than it's ever been. Used to be, we could tap into job fairs, we could rely on interested applicants that would go through our application process online and have multiple candidates for every position that we would ever post. And now we, along with other districts in the area, are finding ourselves having positions available that aren't even being applied for. And so, on one hand, we have to have a long-term strategy that includes things like growing your own, that includes things like taking advantage of our District of Innovation designation, but also that gets really aggressive and proactive about recruitment efforts. And so one of the strategies that we deployed earlier this year was projecting enrollment growth and staffing needs early, and beginning to overhire staff earlier in the fall for positions that we were projecting needing next fall. Knowing that the way that this all really plays out is that they're probably not going to end up being additional staff. We piloted something like this with dual language teachers that were very hard to fill years ago, and they would promote or they would leave or something would happen as fast as we overhired people. And so we deployed that strategy to try and really catch some December grads that are highly talented, highly certified, that are going to be highly sought after in the spring. We wanted to hire them and get them in our system now. Use them where we need them. But secondly, we normally bring the budget to the board in late May or June. And in the budget, the board considers includes the salary package for next year. The problem with that is in February and March, that's when hiring season happens. By April and May, we're fighting for the same talent, usually within our own district. And by June, we're getting what's left that couldn't get a job or that is changing careers perhaps, but they weren't in the market or they weren't as desirable. And so a strategy that we want to deploy is to make sure our employees know what their compensation is going to look like next year before the market gets crazy in February. And another thing that the board has always committed to was compensating all of our employees comparable to the market. We want to be competitive. So last year at this time, Judy had shared some data about where we were with teacher pay and across job classifications. And in most job classifications, we're pretty competitive. With teachers, we had slipped. We'd gotten to be below the average. And the board last year committed to a pretty substantial pay increase for all employees, but especially for teachers. We did a 5% pay increase in addition to the step. And so it was substantial. And then all other employees across the district, in most cases, got a 5% raise, administrators a 3%. Last year at this time, I said if to the board, I recommend that, but I recommend us, if we can do it, to do something like that 2 years in a row, knowing that while we were doing 5% or 5%, districts that are ahead of us are doing 2 or 3 and 2 and 3. So our goal was to be at least slightly above average at the minimum. And if we didn't do that, we were going to get far behind. And before I was in this role, many of you were in your role, Mr. Patterson and Mr. Bryant helped me understand that we had once upon a time really fell behind, and it was very difficult for many, many, many years to get back in the game. So it's a priority that we make an investment, as a effort to retain staff and recruit talent, but also to keep them, right? So what we're proposing tonight is in your folder, and the highlights of it are that we want to increase beginning teacher salary to $56,000 for next year, up from $54,100. And all of these increases make us competitive with the market today, and we believe will keep us above average for next year, regardless of what other districts do. Everybody on the teacher salary schedule will receive a 5% increase based on their salary this year. That's a little bit different than what we did last year, but still substantial. More than we typically ever do. The average increase is over $3,000 for anybody on a teacher salary schedule. The lowest is $2,700 and the highest is $3,200. So it's a substantial pay increase. Our instructional paraprofessionals and our auxiliary pay grades on hourly salaries, our beginning hourly salary, we were proposing moving that from $12 an hour to $13.50. And no full-time employee in the district will make less than $13.50 an hour. All the minimum midpoints and maximums were increased by 6%, and they'll receive a 5% increase of that new midpoint. All paraprofessionals, auxiliary, and technology staff will receive a 5% of midpoint raise, with the exception of the exempt employees in those departments, supervisors and coordinators. They'll receive a 4% of midpoint. Bus drivers and monitors will receive a 5% pay increase on top of their current route pay, as well as we're going to double each step of the longevity incentive. The lowest, after 1 year, they get an additional 25 cents. We want to double that to 50 and double every single step throughout the longevity incentive scale. So it will jump up from 50 cents to 620, which is double, was 25 up to 310. All staff who are on the administrative pay grade will receive 3% of midpoint. And of course, at least today, we're not including any adjustments to stipend, signing bonuses, or any additional extra duty pay for summer school, after school programs, homebound, etc. We'll present those when we present the budget later in the year, and gives us some time to study the market for each of those additional kinds of adjustments. And so I'll be happy to answer any questions the board might have. Should the board approve this evening, and the additional items on the agenda today, my plan is to share all of this with staff district-wide before February 1st, so next week.
I think it's duly needed. I mean, as a business owner, it gets harder and harder to find people. And you gotta keep the one that you have, especially the good ones. And we're seeing that everywhere.
So,
It's well earned, well deserved.
Paid,
Yes.
Yep,
yes. Yes.
ready for the recommendations?
yeah, we're ready to go.
Mr. President, I recommend the board approve the 2022-2023 salary schedule as presented.
We have a recommendation from the superintendent to approve the 2022-2023 salary schedule. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I have a motion from Mr. Victor Garza. I have a second from Ms. Del Brazil. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on to 6.2, spring attendance incentive.
So as I mentioned earlier, one of our critical challenges is substitutes. Of course, everybody has been facing 50% sub-fill rates across the city. Many folks across the city have deployed the strategy of increasing substantially sub-pay. After thinking about that, we realized a couple of things from our view. One is, if you increase sub-pay too much, it may not be sustainable in the future when we don't have such a demand for subs. Secondly, if subs are getting paid higher daily than paraprofessional staff or hourly wage staff, you run the risk of losing a lot of high-quality people from permanent full-time positions to the sub pool. And third, there is no substitute, though they're fantastic and we love them, that can replace a full-time teacher in the classroom or a full-time instructional paraprofessional in the classroom at all. So our preference is to find a way to incentivize our instructional staff, our teachers, our nurses, our librarians, and our instructional paraprofessionals for being able to have great attendance. And our strategy there is that we can improve attendance in the spring, that we can reduce the demand on sub, therefore reducing the high fill rate, the lack of fill rates. So what we're proposing is that this begins February 1st. That it doesn't matter what an employee that we're targeting here, teachers, librarians, nurses, and instructional paraprofessionals, that beginning February 1st to the last day of instruction on May 25th, regardless of any absences that they had prior to that, for classroom teachers, nurses, and librarians, if they have no absences for that period of time, they'll get $1,000 at the end of the year. If they miss 1 day, they get $800. If they miss 2 days, they get $600. And if they miss 3 or more, they don't get this incentive. For instructional paraprofessionals, we chose $300 for perfect attendance. That matches the amount for our quarterly attendance and performance bonuses for other job classifications. If they have 1 absence, $250, 2 absences, $200, and 3 or more absences, they don't qualify for this particular incentive. We'll be able to use ESSER funds to pay for the cost of this attendance incentive. And again, with your approval, should you approve this tonight, we'll be sharing this with staff before February 1st, along with the information about the compensation plan for next year. I'm be happy to answer any questions.
What is classified as an absent or?
So this would be a discretionary absence. So if they're on professional leave for training, that would not be an absence. If we have a a student holiday but an employee work day and they take off, that's an absence.
Okay.
Is there any other kind of absence that I'm missing?
There's local, state, sick leave.
Yeah, so if it's a personal absence and it could be a valid reason, they just unfortunately got ill.
If they get jury duty, that's not an absence.
Jury duty is not an absence. What else?
And we have both personal leave, which is really the local and state sick leave.
So if they take PTO, that's not counted as an absence.
That's an absence.
So that's an absence.
I said again, you said if you're sick,
It's an absence.
that's an absence, am I right? Doctor's excuse don't help you.
It's currently an absence. Remember the problem we're trying to solve. We don't have enough subs.
Well, you know, I didn't go back into, but it's a great idea.
But this is a great idea. But it's for that reason that we're giving them a mulligan and a start over on February 1st.
Yeah.
It is conceivable that a teacher has 25 absences,
So between now
but
and
can still
Monday,
qualify.
between now and Tuesday, they better get their absences in. You won't have nobody showing up to work tomorrow.
Part of the theory, the timeline, the timeline.
Oh, Lord.
The spirit of the timeline here is also mirroring the Omicron variant's recession. So we're feeling like we got past Delta, it affected some people. We got past Omicron, we're getting past Omicron, it's affected some people. We're hoping February 1st to the end of the year, we have no more public health issues that challenge our folks, and that folks, to the extent possible, can control discretionary absences. And we'd rather pay them than pay subs. We love our subs, but we would rather pay our teachers and our instructional pairs and our nurses, for God's sake, and our librarians for being here.
I agree.
And so that's the plan. We're going to give it a go.
I agree.
We'll see what the results are, and if it's effective, we'll see how we can structure something like this as part of our compensation plan going forward, and present you with that information for consideration in the future.
Maybe we could do something like that for the kids that have perfect attendance.
Well, I had another idea for that. I talked to the.
I mean, incentives work. I mean, back when we were going to school, if
Any
you
other
had,
questions?
what, 85 average in all your classes, you have to take your final exams? You got 2 days off? Awesome.
Any other questions?
No.
Mr. President, I recommend the board approve the spring attendance incentive for classroom teachers, nurses, librarians, and classroom paraprofessionals as presented.
We have a recommendation from the superintendent to approve the spring attendance incentive for classroom teachers, nurses, librarians, and classroom paraprofessionals as presented. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I have a motion from Mr. James Mulkey. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Victor Garza. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Move on to 6.3, pay during emergency closing for board policy DEA local.
Yes, sir. Trustees, as you're aware, January 20th, the district had to close in anticipation of potentially dangerous weather. In addition to that, we had several large districts around the area within which many of our employees reside, within which many of our employees' children attend school, that closed as well. That was going to exacerbate our issues with employee attendance and lack of sub-fill rates. We made the decision to close on that day for out of an abundance of caution, but also because we were fearful that if we opened, even if there was good weather with those school closures, we were going to have an unsafe situation with regard to student supervision and our inability to operate. As a result, many of our employees were able to complete their Safe Schools mandated, statutorily mandated training. We tracked and found that the vast majority of our employees completed several modules, some of which assimilated a full day's work, some several hours. But the reality of it is all employees weren't able to work a full day. In addition to that, the board did approve a calendar last year that had additional instructional minutes in it. That day, we do not need to make up as an instructional day because we have an abundance of instructional minutes, so we will meet the state requirement of 75,600 minutes. As a benefit to our employees, and because of the circumstances and the fact that they did dig in and do their very best to crank out some work that we could verify, what we're asking tonight, that the board has the authority to consider due to board policy DEA local, is to choose to pay all of our employees during that closure for any hours that were lost. And that we won't have to schedule ways for that to be made up at any point later in the year. And I'd be happy to answer any questions the board has about that.
I don't have it.
Mr. President, I recommend the board approve the authorization to pay district staff due to the emergency closing on January 20th, 2022.
So moved. Oh.
We'll get there.
I want to get in there.
I'm gonna drag my feet now.
I want to get ahead of this guy, my bad.
We have a recommendation from the superintendent to approve the authorization to pay the district staff due to the emergency closing on January 20th, 2022. Do I have a motion from Mr. Mulkey?
Yeah, so moved.
Do I have a second?
Second. Yeah.
Mr. Victor Garza. All right, before we move on to adjournment, I want the trustees, please. Huh? Oh, all in favor? All opposed? Motion carries. So before we move on to adjournment, I want y'all to get the past bond election this past November, get it out and look at it and go through all the ones that or the total package and see which ones y'all would like. Put your 1 through 10 or whatever it is, your top to the bottom. Which ones do you want? Which ones you'd like to have, or which one you don't think, or whatever. Just your top to bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If it's the 3 schools at the top, if it's 1 school at the top in the CTE building, or the 1 school at the top and the bus garage and the police department, or whatever it is, put it in order so we can talk about it at the next special meeting.
Trustees, I'm emailing all of you the bond presentation, so you'll have it at the top of your inbox.
Because I don't think we need to go through another facility committee thing. I mean, nothing's changed. We all know what they look like. We all know what they are. So go through all that and get your top 10 or whatever it is.
Okay.
So we can decide what we're going to do if we're going to do it. All right, we'll move on to adjournment. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.